Buhari, and President Muhammadu Buhari has run his race. And life is dynamic because as long as you live, you are many things to many people. Some see him as a hero, but some see him otherwise. Those that he called a dot in the circle see him otherwise. Those that he said will treat in the language they understand see him otherwise. That led to the ban of Twitter in this country, because people had to report that tweet and it was deleted, and they felt, oh, how would they delete the tweet of a president? Those that were caught in the web of Decree 4 see him otherwise. Omar Diko see him otherwise. The likes of the politicians that were incarcerated after the 83 elections, about 84 when he got in, don't see him as a hero. But some will see him as a disciplined man, anti-corruption hero. But people will also talk about that legacy and say, but people around him were corrupt. So they talk about being above board like Caesar's wife, but people around you are being tried for corruption, also speaks volume. People he incarcerated for political vendetta. People he tried to terminate their lives. The judges in the death of the knights that were harassed, that everybody said, this is an assault on our judiciary, see him otherwise. But those that were close to him say, he's a father. They'd even stretch it and say, the father of the nation. Those that believed in him prior to 2015 felt once he got that mandate, he was going to set Nigeria right. But what heralded his 8 years, deepening of division, pain, lack of economic gusto and verve, lack of that economic fecundity, and even this current government blames him for the problems they are in now. So with great power comes great responsibility. But do leaders that seek power understand the responsibility, or they just want to be president? Those that see him as a hero will say at least he allowed for fairness in the electoral process. But that argument is also quickly punctured by the fact that he didn't sign the electoral reforms leading up to the 2019 elections where he was going to participate in. But they will also say, at least under him, oppositions could win governorship election. In fact, some governor in the opposition went to thank him. Some will say things like, oh, the electricity bill. Some will also say he did infrastructure, at least if not because of him. We'll not have railway, will not have the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. I will not have other infrastructure like that. That he did more thread of roads than anybody. But while we also talk about the rail line, some will also argue, where was there a need for the Kanu Maradi line? President Buhari, when he ascended the throne in 2015, made the famous words that I am for everybody and for nobody. But some said he was actually for some people. He quoted Shakespeare saying there's a tide in the affairs of man. And we thought he had set the tone for the country he wanted to build. But today, like two sides of a coin, there are two sides to history of President Buhari. There will be those that will say, Veni, vidi, vici. But there will be those that will say, President Buhari, you caused pain, hurt, division, unfairness, and unkindness. Whatever part you take this morning, please remember something. We will all die. And what will be said after we're gone? I pay tribute to my king, our Sikuru Adetono, of blessed memories. He did 6 decades there. He did his best to push forward and advance the cause of Ijebu land. Something dear to his heart in his last days was the Ijebu state. Some have argued, do we need more states? Some have said possibly. The argument they even make is that it's only Ijebu land out of the former divisions that didn't get a state in the end. But his legacies are there. I took out time to read his book, his autobiography. He talked about his triumphs, his trials and travails. But one thing you cannot take away from him was that he had a heart for his country. Others might say otherwise because there are 2 sides to history. But whatever it is, like John Donne says in the death of those both men today, is that the death of every man diminishes us. We will all die. What will be said about you?
Okay, it was Chilon of Pata in the 17th century, a 7th century philosopher, who said, do not speak ill of the dead. Also in Antigone by Sophocles, written in 431 BC, Antigone, the major lesson from Antigone is that, look, the dead must be honored. And then there is an Italian saying, Do mortuos nili nisi bonum. It also means essentially the same thing. So I begin with that theoretical concept. And also in Africa, people say, do not speak ill of the dead. When a man dies, it is assumed that all the sins of the dead are forgiven. However, while I quote that theoretical background, I have written editorials on Hastings Banda of Malawi, Idi Amin of Uganda, in the course of this career. Sani Abacha, where we said it as it is, because we had no other option. But I think in the case of President Muhammadu Buhari, who died yesterday, 1942, 17 December 1942, to 13 July 2025, it can be said that his legacy is of a mixed character. There are those who love him deeply. There are those who hate him as equally as possible. I think his career can be divided into 3 parts as follows. First, his military career. He was one of those young men, 70 of them, who joined the Nigerian Military Training Company in 1962, I think. He was 19 at the time. And then, of course, it was from there that he was part of the team that was sent to Mons Adeshot in England to be trained as officers. And then he returned as a second lieutenant. It was maybe 2021 at that time. And then, he became part of the Nigerian military. Now, key highlights of his career. During the counter coup of 1966, July counter coup, he was one of the officers who took part in that coup, removing Agunyi Nrusi from power. There are some people who will never forgive him for that. Now, when the Civil War began in 1967, he was in the 1st Division under the command of General Muhammad Shua, one of the finest officers ever to come from the northern part of Nigeria. From the 1st Division, he will later play a big role in the 2nd Division of the same military. And he was part of that team, the Civil War heroes who, kept Nigeria safe, kept Nigeria as one, as General Yakubu Gowon will always say. That to go on with one Nigeria, is the mission. Now, of course, after the Civil War, He was one of those officers who benefited greatly. In 1975, right? He was one of those officers who ended the Gowon administration. He was part of that coup too.